Done. Okay. Well, welcome to the QEP annual report presentation for this academic year. And we will go over a few things regarding just the QEP as a whole, since we did wrap up this past year. And we're so excited to have you. I am Ashley Spearman, the Director of Academic Services and Engagement and of the QEP.
And I'm Allie Michael. I'm the Coordinator for Academic Services and Engagement.
Okay. Well,
we do have the amazing Rachel Carroll on as well. We couldn't do anything without Rachel. So she's on here helping us today as well.
Thank you. Of course. I thought that was a given, so I don't know. Everyone knows that. Rachel runs the office. Okay, so to get started, we felt like we should talk about the keys to the world by the numbers and kind of talk about our overall process through the numbers in our projects. And so it may be hard to believe, but we started this process actually before 2015, but officially in 2015-2016 academic year. And the implementation of the QEP has been a rigorous process with many accomplishments and lessons learned throughout the past 5 years. However, I will say 2019-2020 was, as many of you know, like a year like no other. And over the past year in particular, we would have never been able to I guess how the year would turn out with the impact of COVID-19 and our projects in particular, with our project being a focus of study abroad and service learning in particular. So throughout 2019 and 2020, which was then called the Learning Opportunities Center, was able to expose over 150 students to high impact practice opportunities and award all of its funding. I repeat, all of its funding. The only year we were able to award all of our funding to over 35 different projects and students related to study abroad and service learning. Unfortunately, several of those opportunities were cut short and or canceled due to the pandemic. And even though, despite this disappointment, our students persevered and made the most out of the situation as much as possible that was really impacting the world. We will start out by talking about our Gov's Glow program, and that's our global learning opportunities project, where our students continued to meet virtually and discuss alternate graduation plans or going into the workforce. Our Keys Medal of Distinction students were still awarded to about 19 students throughout the spring and the summer. And that's an award that we'll talk about a little bit later, but we give to students who participate in at least 2 HIP experiences and have over a 3.0 GPA. The students were continuing to be exposed to service learning and study abroad. We decided for the first time to allow students that were not able to travel or participate and have received funding to extend that opportunity to go towards this year. So they could pick up another course or another project and kind of move forward if they received Keys to the World funding or BOLD funding. So even though our students weren't able to necessarily, as many students, take part in having their experience that last year, we still wanted to provide a comprehensive review or overview of what we were able to accomplish and what the year looked like moving forward.
So just to provide a little bit of demographic data for the 2019-2020 academic year for Keys to the World. So we had 55 students that were able to complete a project, either service learning or study abroad, before the pandemic shut everything down. But we still were able to have 55 students that participated in that. So we had 2 service learning courses over the fall semester, and then we had several study abroad experiences over winter break, as well as a few that went on spring break, and we even had some exchange students as well. So just to give you a breakdown of some of our demographics for that, we provided a breakdown by race and ethnicity, as well as first generation Pell Grant eligible and adult learners. With the BOLD grant, which where we provide up to $3,000 to our students for a study abroad experience to cover their travel costs. We really created that with diverse students in mind, and we defined diversity a little broader than usual. So we included first generation Pell Grant eligible adult learners, underrepresented minorities, as well as underrepresented in their field of study. And we had several people that fit those categories or fit multiple categories within that. So we did have 27% of our students that had these experiences this year were adult learners, which is higher than the average of what we had over the course of the QEP, which we'll see in just a few minutes. And I think that that's a testament to our BOLD grant and for that initiative that we started. And 56% of our Pell Grant eligible, or 56% of those were Pell Grant eligible. So more than half of those students had a true need financially for this experience. I was a little surprised at the gender breakdown. 78% were male, which was, usually it's flipped the other way. But I think it's because the majority of our study abroad trips that were scheduled for the summer got canceled. And so I think that kind of skewed the numbers a little bit. There's a research project and they're waiting for me to look further. So by class year, we did have quite a few freshmen and sophomores, so underclassmen that had their experiences. That's pretty rare, especially for study abroad. One of the things that we discovered through the QEP process was that students had the perception that study abroad experiences were for upperclassmen. And so they didn't think that they could engage during their freshman or sophomore years. And so we really did a lot of targeted marketing and communication to help them to see that that's not the case. And all three of those freshmen were part of the GovsGlow learning community, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, which was really a great way to open up opportunities to more students. The majority came from the College of Arts and Letters. That's typical, that's what we usually see. A lot of our opportunities are within arts and letters. And we had representation from all colleges. So I like that. Even if it was just one student, we still had representation across the board, which was really great. So now to look at the QEP demographic data for the entirety of the QEP. Since this past academic year was so strange with the pandemic happening, we did want to include overall data as kind of a picture of what we did. We had 41% of the students that were involved in the QEP were freshmen, which is great. We had more freshmen part of the QEP than we did seniors, which I was really, really excited about. Or actually, no, I think that's a typo now that I'm looking at it. But it was really exciting to have all of these students. We did some targeted efforts for our freshmen and sophomores, like I mentioned before. So that was really encouraging. As you see the gender percentages there, that's more what we're accustomed to. With slightly more females, but it's pretty much an even split between the two. First generation students, 30% of our students involved in the QEP were first generation, 17% Pell Grant eligible, and 21% adult learners. So, so we were really able to reach a diverse group of students. As far as race and ethnicity, we had 36% of all of our students that were represented came from underrepresented minority status. And that was, I believe, an effort that was really from our BOLD scholarship and from some of the other efforts that we made to really take away barriers to participate in these projects. Again, arts and letters has the most representation, but a lot of those opportunities reside within arts and letters. We had quite a few from business. A lot of that is special thanks to Dr. Jennifer Thayer and her VITA program that is a service learning class that she offers each spring that has been a vital part of the QEP, and we have provided funding to them several times. And then we also had representation from education, STEM, and behavioral health sciences.
So as we take a look at our student learning outcomes, we did have 3 SLOs associated with the QEP project. And so we affectionately refer to them as Think, Act, and Reflect. And so for SLO number 1, we really wanted students to be able to connect their experience through their high impact practice with what they had learned in the university setting. And that we specifically say university setting because there are times where there's an experience that a student may have by being associated with an organization or a club or let's say undergraduate research, but that's attributed to the whole university experience in particular. So we wanted them to really dig deep and think about what collective experiences that they have had. For number 2, we wanted them to take action and to actually be able to adapt and apply whatever skill, theory, methodology, etc., that they learned in this university setting to a new situation or problem that they may be acquiring by being a high impact practice. So this was a new way for them to actually learn and adapt to the curriculum. And so we wanted them to kind of be able to articulate how they were able to do that. And lastly, but not least, would be to reflect. And having students really take a deep dive and be able to reflect and demonstrate their ability to have meaningful self-reflection that hopefully will lead to a sense of self-awareness or a competency to dealing with new challenges in situations was a little bit of a task when we first started with our students, because this was a new way for them to regurgitate information. Our students were used to reading information, obtaining it, and being able to regurgitate that onto a test or an exam. But when we're saying, well, really take a deep dive and think about this, and reflect over your collective experience, and then just tell us how you feel about that. They were like, where do I check the box? This is maybe multiple choice. And so we had to work through that process. And in the end, they were able to accomplish that task. So when we look at the SLOs, we feel like we should give you a little bit of context. So these SLOs were derived from a part of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, which was a reputable organization that attributes a lot of their rubrics to their learning. And so we decided to use the integrative value rubric, which stands for a valid assessment of learning in undergraduate education. And so the integrative learning component really is defined as understanding and a disposition that a student builds over the curriculum and co-curriculum experiences that allows them to make simple connections to ideas and experiences. It helps them to synthesize and transfer learning to new complex situations within and beyond the campus. And this is exactly what we wanted our students to do. So you can see why we said this integrative value rubric really connects specifically what our goals were for what we were trying to do. The outcomes that were chosen was because we wanted to specifically address cognitive behavioral learning. And so we wanted them to think about the experience, to take action on it. How can you apply what you've learned and then reflect over it? So our overarching plan was to measure the students' level of proficiency once we attributed this rubric. And so you can see that when we started out in 2015-16, it was a low level of proficiency. They were basically barely getting off the grid. So it was a 12-point scale, and there were 4 levels. And so you can go from 1, or really technically you start at 0, but you can go from 1 to 4. And so our students were just not getting off the grid. They were on the board because there were some people who had a 0. So we were excited that they actually were on the board. But we asked our QEP assessment committee to really analyze, look at the assessment rubric, the value rubric, and take it, and analyze and look at the number of HIP experiences. Because what we quickly found was that the more HIP experiences a student had, they were able to kind of attribute and escalate up the scale from 1 to 4. And so we looked at a 1 being beginner. They had to get on the board. So how does this look when they have 1 experience? What does this look like? They're kind of touching the surface. And so as students had 2 HIPs, we expect them to be adequate or accomplished, which that we considered the 3. And if they had 3 or more experiences, they should be advanced. They should be at a number 4, where they can explain a wide variety of experiences across the board. And so that's how we looked at all of the 3 SLOs based on those proficiency levels as they moved across. And so we were able to see, once we start looking at those proficiency levels in that way, and we really started that about 2017, 2018. And so that's when we fully implemented that at the end of 2018, and we were able to see that our students were making those connections. Many of our students have not experienced 3 or more HIP experiences. So that made sense for them to be at a level 2.
So the QEP also had 6 goals that we focused on, and we'll go through each one of these individually to show our progress over the last 5 years. So the first 4 were very much kind of quantitative goals. They were all about increasing the numbers of the opportunities as well as involvement and participation in high impact practices. And then goals 5 and 6 were more focused on student perceptions. So we'll go through each one of these and report on how we did. So this fun little chart here is directly from, well, it's from our QEP annual report, but it's also from our 5th year impact report that we submitted to SAC-COC. So in the green boxes, it shows you when we actually met our goal, and the red boxes is when we did not meet our goal. Obviously in 2019, 2020, it would be very difficult to meet our goals since so many of our programs got canceled. But it was very encouraging. Our goal was to increase the number of faculty or staff teaching HIP courses, and we were able to achieve that in many of the years. Excuse me. I did want to note that we included internships and undergraduate research on all of these charts since they were part of the QEP when we first started in the first 2 years. And then after we had a refocusing of the QEP in 2016, 2017, that following year, we had to remove those sadly from the QEP plan. So that's why you see those grayed out at the bottom. But again, we based the goal status on the baseline year. So our baseline year was 2015, 2016. So if we had an increase from that in a year, we counted that as a met goal. So 2016, 2017 was just a rockin' year for us. We did great. Everybody in high impact practices really did great 2016, 2017. So that was encouraging that year to do that. I'm kind of glad that 2016, 2017 wasn't our baseline year, or else that would have been very difficult. So as you can see, we were pretty successful for most of those years. And of course, 2019, 2020 threw us off. But a lot of this was because of the grant opportunities that we offered and really getting faculty and staff involved in these efforts. We had lots of great collaborations across colleges and departments that helped to encourage these numbers. And we couldn't have done it without the faculty teaching these courses. And so they were really amazing through this whole process.
Yes, and like Ali said, the goal number 2 was to increase the number of, in particular, HIP practices offered to students. So while we did continue to have an increase of repeat courses, these would be new courses that we have. And obviously, as you'll see reoccurring, we did not meet any of our goals in the last year because many of our projects were canceled. But we were on track to at least match the years before, because sometimes it's difficult to increase the number of experiences offered because it's a lot of work. In particular, with study abroad and even service learning, there's an additional application and a vet process that you have to go through. So it's a lot of marketing and working with faculty and staff as they're trying to create new experiences. We constantly were reaching out to different areas and had lots of great ideas that were generating. So I do want to say a lot of the pressure rests upon the faculty to create these type of experiences. And so they do have to have an application and be approved to be able to travel or even go in the community and obtain a community partner to be able to have these experiences. And so we constantly were encouraged by the number of faculty and staff that would reach out to our office to say, I have this amazing co-curricular idea, ways to get students real life experiences to be able to offer new experiences for students that ultimately affect their potential career choices. And even we've had students that even changed their major after having these types of experiences. So we do want just to mention that as well.
So these are the overall student headcount. Goal 3 was to increase student participation in high impact practices. And so this is just the overall student headcount in each of these experiences. And again, we started off really strong, and of course, it's just so depressing to see that final column just all red. I know, and what's so depressing about it is that that represents so many students that weren't able to have these experiences. And so we had a lot of tears over the summer. I'm sure Marissa and Paige are in that same boat with us. We had to talk a lot of students through that experience. But still, we really focused on identifying barriers to students participating in these experiences, whether it be service learning or study abroad. Some of it was just a matter of communication with those students. That may not necessarily be a barrier. It may be that they just didn't know that that experience was out there and available for them. So a lot of it was just about the communication that we had and just talking with students, and then figuring out, well, hey, what can we do to actually reduce that barrier or help you get over that barrier. And so I think that that's why we were able to have those great gains in a lot of those areas. We also wanted to increase diverse student involvement in high impact practices. And so we really wanted to focus on our underrepresented minorities, adult learners, first generation students, and Pell Grant eligible. Now, I know there's a lot of red on this chart, and that's a little depressing, but we still were able to focus on these different populations. Like I said before, identify those barriers and help them to overcome them. And a lot of it was just that communication with those, with different groups of students, to let them know, like with our adult learners, to help them with things like finding a program that would work for them if they had children at home. You know, they can't really be gone for a month during the summer. So what can we do to help them to work in that situation? With first generation students, a lot of times I would talk with students and they would be like, I'm really interested in studying abroad, but I just don't even know where to start. And so actually sitting down and holding their hand through that process and showing them what needs to be done. So even though there may be a lot of red on that, I feel like while it may not have been met from a quantitative standpoint, we really did a lot to change the campus culture in regards to high impact practices and the perceptions that students had about actually having these experiences.
So our fifth goal was about improving the student perception about the climate for reflective and integrative learning. So if you remember, that was basically SLO number 3. And I alluded to the fact that our students had a little bit of a challenge with that area. So we decided to evaluate the student experience through pre-post surveys that we administered at the beginning of the HIP experience. So within the first 2 to 3 weeks, when they hadn't really delved into the actual high impact practice of the experience, the co-curricular component. And then we concluded with a post survey within the last 2 weeks of the semester, or even a week after the semester ended. So the survey's results that we found did not match the results that we received on the SLO rubrics, which in this case was good. And that was because students were indicating that they had a transformational and life-changing experience in the class. Like I said, they were changing majors, they were getting involved, they were seeking out more HIP specific courses. So this knowledge, coupled with the SLO assessment results, kind of reinforced our decision to realign the prompt and the rubric and gather additional data. And so I have a couple statistics about some comments that students said. So when we asked students, had they heard of the Keys to the World initiative, and did they know about this initiative that we were starting, 56% of the students said that they had heard of it, and 67% said that because of the events that we were having and the workshops that we offered, that influenced their decision to actually participate in high impact practices. So we were able to actually tangibly look at to see how our students, after they attended a workshop or an event, that actually turned into actual enrollment and enjoying and registering for a HIP course. So that was great. A majority of the students, 94%, said that they intentionally registered for a HIP course due to the opportunity for community involvement, obviously the desire to travel, like who doesn't want to leave the country and engage with our fantastic faculty and staff in that way, and language proficiency. That was a huge one. Students that were minoring or were interested in minoring or going into a field. We saw an uptick in students who were biology majors going into pre-med that also said, I think I want to do Doctors Without Borders. I think this would help the community that I'm going to serve, or if I want to volunteer. And that's great. That was kind of expanding their research and then their areas of interest. When we asked students, like, what were some of the top barriers that kind of allowed them to disconnect from even enjoying these type of experiences, number one was grants and funding. And so that's kind of one of the reasons that sparked us to launch the BOLD grant, which BOLD stands for Bridging Opportunities of Leadership Through Diversity. And so we specifically wanted to look at diverse populations, and like Ali mentioned, have that broad range of reasons outside of just race and ethnicity and diversity of thought, but say, look at a major and say, oh, well, if we have a male that's in a nursing field, that's a diverse field. We don't have many males. Or if we have a female that's an engineering major or computer science, and we have can work with faculty to raise awareness and create these experiences for certain demographics. That's exactly what we wanted to do. So some of our other data said 98% of service learning and study abroad students were expecting to have significant amount of growth in applying theory and knowledge to their practical experience. And that was great, that we wanted them to have that. And then we were able to live up to that, because many of them said that, some of them said, every student should be required to have a high impact practice course. And we're like, yes, that is what we want to hear, just because they had such a valuable experience. And we also want to mention that our experiences were a wide range of experiences. There were some, which is why a lot of them probably are in Cole, in the undergraduate core curriculum of their classes. So that was a great introduction through communications or through their biology or a math class. And then they were, through focus groups, let us know that they were craving these experiences. Now that I've kind of solidified my major, I really want to see what type of experience I can have and I can connect. And they were even thinking about career and resume writing, and this would look great on a graduate application, et cetera, et cetera. So we were really starting to see kind of the fruits of our labor of what we were impacting them for Goal 5. Goal 6 was specifically about bridging the connection with students and faculty interaction. And so for this, we decided to use the NESI and FESI data. So the NESI is a national survey of student engagement that we administer annually throughout the QEP that specifically goes to freshman students and senior students. And the reason why we give the NESI is an effort to measure their perception of the climate for integrative learning based on their participation in HIP courses. So the NESI is a huge instrument, over 120 questions, but there's one component specifically designated for high impact practice experiences. And so service learning and study abroad were some of those experiences, among others. And so the first time we specifically looked at how this data was really impacting our students was in 2017. And so we actually received a combined report that included the NESI and the FESI, which is the faculty survey of student engagement. And when we compared those perceptions across thematic areas, so there are some thematic areas that they ask the same amount of questions to students and faculty, we saw a few discrepancies in between students and faculty, which we weren't really surprised. You're expected to see that in some way, because just the substantive nature of majors, progression, coursework, how students perceive things and how faculty perceive things sometimes have differing areas. But the two areas where we saw a significant amount of departure was the reflective and integrative learning that addressed perspectives that related to diversity, which were pertinent to students' perceptions and the campus climate. And so faculty responses contrasted by saying that lower and upper division course designations were didn't have as much as engagement as they felt like in higher level courses. So once you got to your senior year. And so that was kind of interesting. But despite the discrepancies between the student and the faculty regarding their reflective and integrative learning and student-faculty interaction, the data combined from the QEP funded students post-interviews described a completely different perspective from a HIP student perspective. So the FESI and NESI, keep in mind, goes to all students in all components, no matter if they were in HIP courses or not. But we had the post interviews specifically from HIP students. And so we were able to kind of take a deep dive and see what that looked like for that particular group of students. So for the students that actually took a HIP course, we were able to find out that HIP students said their level of participation, their future expectations, and recognition of opportunities were quite higher in their HIP courses with their faculty. One student said, "I love the cultural immersion and diversity experience. I wouldn't have had this type of experience in any other regular classroom." Another student said, "This was a higher level of thinking, and I was actually able to work in my field and gather valuable experiences before I actually got into the workforce." So these were allowing us to know that on a large scale, that students maybe had some discrepancies with faculty in their perception, but this engaged connection, this intentional learning that was happening in our HIP courses were definitely worth us mentioning and continuing to enforce across the student population. When looking at some other data, over 100% of our students that were interviewed indicated that the HIP course experience provided an immersive and realistic perspective to the course, which allowed them to have a greater connection to course material and direct impact on their future career choice. And over 90% plan to engage in another HIP experience before they graduated. And they intentionally did this because 45% said they loved the connection that they made with the faculty members. So that was just music to our ears. That's exactly what we wanted to hear, and know that those connections with the faculty lead to letters of recommendation, leads to graduate work, and even just a level of connection within the field that you need sometimes when you're going into the workforce. So we were happy to see that the HIP courses were doing exactly what we wanted them to do with this goal.
So we wanted to touch on the Keys Medal of Distinction. One of the things that came out of our focus groups when we met with students was that they wanted to have their high impact experiences highlighted and recognized by the university. And so we took that and ran with it. So we created the Keys Medal of Distinction. And this is an award that is given to undergraduates that have at least 6 credit hours in either study abroad or service learning courses. And they need to have a minimum cumulative GPA of 3.25 when they apply for graduation. And if they meet those requirements, then they receive a really nice medal that we give them that they can wear with their commencement regalia. We also worked with the Office of the Registrar to get that achievement notated on their transcript. So it's actually on their official transcript right at the top that they achieved the Keys Medal of Distinction. And it's outlined what that means, so that when they have to submit an official transcript for a job or for graduate school, it's notated on there that they had this experience. So for the 2019-2020 academic year, we had 35 recipients across all of the graduations during that year. And the average GPA for those students was a 3.63, even though the minimum is 3.25. Consistently across the board, it's pretty much every year the average is 3.63 for all of these students that receive the Keys Medal of Distinction. Overall, since we implemented this in 2018, I believe was the first year we implemented it, we've had 77 total recipients overall that have gotten this medal. For some postgraduate statistics for that, we check in with these students periodically. We may have even done a little bit of social media stalking to see if we could figure out where they are now. We call them from time to time and say, hey, what are you up to? So 38% of them are currently employed. 42% of them are in graduate school now, and 12% of them are seeking a job. But we really like to check in with these students and see what they're doing post-graduation, because most of them are pretty fabulous, and we love to hear their success stories. We usually would stalk them before graduation and take pictures of all of them, and so that we could have pictures of them wearing their medals with their commencement regalia. So I did want to highlight Gov's Glow from this past academic year. So Gov's Global Learning Opportunities was a learning community that we established, and it was funded through a TBR Sears grant that we received this last year for $35,000. The goal was to have 30 students enrolled and to provide a study abroad travel scholarship for each of those students. It would be $1,100 for each that they could put towards a study abroad trip of their choice. And we had bi-weekly meetings, meaning every other week, not twice a week. That would be a little crazy. So every other week we would meet and we would have discussion opportunities. We discussed topics like, we really let them lead those conversations. I asked them the first meeting, what are some topics that you would like to explore? And so we would talk about climate change. We talked about poverty. One week we had a very lively discussion about political parties because they shared with me, they said, you know, we always hear things about political affiliation, political party affiliation, but we just don't really know what that means. So can we talk about that? And what is the Electoral College? And, you know, how does all of this happen? And so we had a wonderful little civics lesson one week. And it was great. I actually ran into one of my former GLOW students on campus a few weeks ago. And he said, Allie, we need to have another session because I got a lot to talk about with this election cycle. So we might have to revive this group for a little bit. But we also, within those meetings, would talk about professional development. So we talked about interview skills. We talked about developing a resume. We talked about noting our high impact experiences on our resume. How can you tell your employer that you have study abroad experience? How can you include that in an interview when you're interviewing for a job or for graduate school? We also did service opportunities together. We had planned to do a graduate school tour this spring, which unfortunately got canceled, but we were still able to have Megan Mitchell meet with us via Zoom to talk to us about opportunities at Austin Peay through our graduate school. And we had a lot of freshmen through that Zoom session that were asking questions and saying, okay, well, what can I start doing now to prepare for grad school in a few years? So I really liked that we were able to plant that idea early for those students. And one of my favorite statistics about this group is that even in the midst of a pandemic, we had 90% of our students retained for the fall 2020 semester. We've stayed in contact with them. We've given them pep talks throughout the semester. We've answered questions that they've had, and they just really were a great group. I wanted to share a little quote from one of them, Madison Morgan, who is a freshman, and she did an exchange program in France this spring, which unfortunately was cut short. And you all may have read her story. The PR department released a story on her that she caught one of the last flights out of Paris to get back to the United States. But she told us that she was truly fortunate to have one of her biggest dreams come true as a freshman. She applied for GLOW on a whim, thinking that it was too early in her university career to go abroad. But thanks to us and many others who believed in her, she got to experience and see things that she had only dreamt of. And she's already planning to go back to France. She said, it was too short, I gotta go back. So she's already planning her return trip.
Yeah, so Madison is just one of many students that we could rave about. You know, sometimes I feel like they were like my children because you get so invested in their career and their aspirations. And we had some really great projects that were able to launch like right before we were forced to return all the students domestically or in their service learning projects. So we affectionately call this section the fruits of our labor. And so the Jamaica Program was one of those programs that we worked really hard along with the Study Abroad Office to kind of get off the ground. And so that was a math course. And typically students run from math. And so we decided to partner with the math department to kind of think through how could they offer math in a way that was engaging and not scary. And so it was students that were enrolled in either Math 1010 or Math 1530. And they actually traveled to Jamaica to work with students in Jamaica and learn about the economy. And they worked in the school system and helped students learn math in a way that they actually didn't think that they were going to be able to do. So one of the students, Jatavian Osborne, said, for any student prepared to go on a study abroad trip, I recommend for you to connect amongst your peers within the group, be open-minded and open to try new things, even if they look nasty or taste nasty. It's the experience that matters. Remember to live in the moment. And this was a student that was really engaged and served on lots of things on campus. So I was quite surprised that he had this perspective, but he kind of got out there and he was able to kind of connect with a lot of his peers. And he even said he is stayed connected with some of the people in this group. And that's one of the things we also want to see, to make lifelong connections. The faculty who led this program was Dr. Jackie Vogel, and she said the students in her math courses were much more successful. She didn't have any of her students, they all passed, none of them dropped the course. And that's very unusual for a gen ed math class, especially 1530 and 1010, I'm sure. The students became like a little family, and their interactions can't begin to compare to a traditional course where you spend 3 hours a week, but you stayed up late nights, and even to play Uno. So she even talked about a little bit more. We have other quotes from her about how they connected, and she was able to connect with students on a level that she's never been able to do in a traditional course. So I'm sure traveling with 10 or 12 students out of the country definitely gets you invested and connected in the course. And so these students had a wonderful experience, and we're glad that they were able to participate.
So I cannot do any sort of presentation on the QEP without highlighting this amazing student right here, Stacy McAllister Brooks, who just graduated in the spring from Austin Peay. She has really been a part of the QEP from its inception. And I told her, I got to see her a few weeks ago, and I said, Stacy, I'm glad that the QEP ended when you graduated, because I don't know how to do the QEP without you. I'm going to have her come back when it's time for the next QEP. So she presented at all of our Govs Row sessions with us. We would do a presentation to both parents and students, and she would present with us and talk from a student perspective, which we found when we would talk to students. I would go to APSU 1000 classes, like just a few weeks after I saw them at Row. And I would say, how many of you remember hearing from me? And they'd look at me and be like, I have never seen you before in my life. But when Stacy started doing it with us, oh, they remembered her. They remembered everything that she said. And what was great was that she had a study abroad experience. She went to Spain the summer after her freshman year. So she was really the one to tell students as they're coming in as bright-eyed freshmen, and they're so scared to start this new experience and so excited. And she would say, hey, you should go ahead and think about studying abroad right now, and we can talk to you about it. But then she also had a service learning experience. She did the beekeeping service learning course, and that's a picture of her in the beekeeping service learning course. So we had to highlight her. She also went on to become the student trustee last year, so she served in that capacity. She's really, she's going places. So, but then I also kind of as a final highlight of the fruits of our labor, I really wanted to highlight Brooklyn Hortenstein, who was a bold recipient last summer. So she went to Poland in the summer of 2019. And Ashley and I are actually preparing to do a presentation at SAC-COC specifically on students and student voices. And so I was going back through Brooklyn's reflective essay, and I read the passage that I have there on the screen. And not to be dramatic, but I really got chills as I was reading it in my office. And just because it was so relevant to today, it just really spoke to me about where we are as a nation and people today. And so she talked about how this experience, especially touring the concentration camps in Poland, it left her with a shaking realization of how important our voices really are in the world. And that as college students, it can be really difficult and frustrating to keep up in today's world on public issues and what we feel about them or what they can do about them. And that it feels like our voices don't matter sometimes. And so she talked more, I won't read the whole quote, but more about how it's important to keep up with those current events and use your voice. And so I really feel like the QEP has helped us to empower our students, has helped us to help our students to articulate what these experiences mean to them and how they can take that further out into the world and make a difference beyond Austin Peay.
And with that being said, we can only hope that we did our campus and our students and our faculty and staff justice when it's hard to just articulate the amount of experience and that sometimes quantitatively does not come across when you look at red bars that say not met. And I'm like, Allie, what do you mean we didn't meet? We have all these experiences. But I think that just is a testament to speak to SAC-COC saying that this is a quality enhancement plan. and that you, as long as you're creating and investing and being intentional in the quality, creating quality experiences for your students and faculty, then that can come across. And so we submitted a very dense and intense 10-page report. There were so many times that we went over that, and to SACS this past spring, and in September, our impact report with the QEP, along with many other components of the impact report, was approved by SACS CSD. So we wouldn't be able to do this and even this presentation without many of you that are on this call, including Dr. Chandler and Paige Williams and Alexandra Wills in the Service Learning Office, and many, many others that have served, and Christina, et cetera, on committees and listened to us rant about students and served in the assessment, the summer assessment team, especially, because anytime you can have faculty and staff get with you every summer for 6 hours a day just to talk about assessment and how we can expand our reach and connect to students, you just know that this is a really special place to work, that who really care about the students. So we're excited with how we ended, and obviously the outcome, and how we will continue to offer these experiences for students. We still track HIP experiences for our students and trying to engage and keep them connected, even beyond service learning and study abroad, as well as internships and undergraduate research. We're still just an advocate for them to really be connected, because we see the value for our students, especially in the midst of a pandemic. How do you showcase yourself? How do you have yourself stand apart and engage in this type of world? So in the next couple of years, we will still be slowly but surely starting this process again. But the next impact report, or really not impact report, QEP for our reaffirmation, will be in 2024-2025 academic year. So we will be taking proposals and ideas, and hopefully working with some of you. We would love for you to submit those ideas to make our next QEP just as fruitful as our last one. So thank you. Any questions or discussion or anything else? These are just some pictures. We have some amazing pictures of different opportunities for us. So that's the Jamaica group at the top. I got to travel to Jamaica. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat or unmute yourself.
I am going to stop sharing so I can actually see everybody's
I'm
faces.